What do I think the Indian media landscape is? Well, I would say it's a little bit like an unattended classroom, you know, where the teacher is on sick leave and the students are kind of free to do anything they wish to do. Now imagine an entire school where all of the teachers coincidentally and hypothetically are on sick leave. Today, my speech, as you can see, it will be a little bit about the media landscape, right, in India and how it's oversaturated. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I'm from. So, it is no secret that when I say India, you already have a preconceived notion of what my country is. And it is no secret that the Western representation, which is kind of the predominant representation of this country in media, is at times inaccurate, and there are various misconceptions, and I believe that my country at times is misunderstood and stereotyped. But I need to tell you just how massive this country is, okay? There are 28 states and 9 union territories. And with 28 states, each state is kind of like a small country in and of itself because of how diverse it is. They have their own distinct cuisine, their own arts, their own music, their own festivals, their own languages. So regional identity is a very big thing. Now if you see the 2 location pins on this map, that is where my parents are from. So I'm from the northern part of India. So I think it's very important when we talk about India to recognize that this is a very diverse country, it's a very diverse region, and it is very difficult to make statements that can apply to the whole region, because that would be generalizing. You know, a lot of this, everything, it's so diverse, so you can't really make statements that encompass everything about this place. Please also keep in mind throughout my presentation that a lot of what I'm saying is my perspective as a third culture individual. I grew up here and I haven't actually spent much time living in the country, so you need to recognize that this is my perspective as how I view the place. So Indian media actually matches the magnitude of this as well, and my memories of Indian news media are limited to my summer vacations that I spent in the country, whether it was, you know, seeing my grandma religiously read the newspaper every morning, or my grandpa who, from the minute he wakes up, he has the TV on and the news channel on, and should any of the grandkids want to watch anything else, they will be chased away. So there is really this culture of consuming news in India, whether it be my grandparents or even my dad. News consumption is like a daily vitamin, you know, for us. Okay, so this is what's on the menu today. You can have a look, and we'll get right into it, into this feast. So, how do we reach 1.4 billion people? Well, the Indian media landscape is huge. There are thousands of publications and channels, and recently there's been a rise in digital publications that claim to be independent. There's a growing trend, I've noticed, of YouTube channels, so it's like sort of these opinion channels, these news gurus who kind of comment on the facts as opposed to portray the facts, just plain and simple. Most of the media is controlled by large conglomerates, as one can imagine, and these are privately held and mainly funded by advertising. So you can see we have like a vast variety of media outlets. These are some of the big guys, okay? These are the big guys. These are like very, very powerful families. Okay, so these are family, like run conglomerates. The heads of media, these are billionaires. I think most of you, at least I hope so, should have heard of Ambani, Mukesh Ambani, and he is like the head of Reliance, which own like many other industries like telecommunications or energy or retail or textiles. So you can see that pleasing them is very important. Keeping them happy is kind of important thing because they have control over so many parts of your life. Now, the Indian media landscape is very difficult to explain, whether it be 10 minutes or 10 months, okay? Like, I can't really get into it that deeply because there's a mix of business and politics and allegiances, and like the ownership is all messy, the information is scarce. So a lot of these media outlets, what they do is they expand by franchising and licensing to operate magazines and websites. So a news channel will have a newspaper, they will have radio, they will have whatnot, they'll have many things. And the reason for this monopoly is essentially because Indian media is self-regulated, and there aren't really any strict regulations that prevent cross-media ownership or vertical integration. So, what's the issue? Well, if you ask me, after 4 years of studying journalism and many more years of consuming news, what do I think the Indian media landscape is? Well, I would say it's a little bit like an unattended classroom, you know, where the teacher is on sick leave and the students are kind of free to do anything they wish to do, and they can get noisy, right? When the teacher leaves, you get a little bit noisy, try to test some rules, you break some rules. Now imagine an entire school where all of the teachers coincidentally and hypothetically are on sick leave, okay? So, without any regulation, you can imagine that such a vast media landscape can get a little bit out of hand. According to the survey by KAS and the Center for Study Developing Societies, 68% of Indians are spending up to 4 hours every day watching TV. TV, like traditional TV, like with the remote, you know? So already you can see there's a high rate of media consumption through TV. TV is also the main channel to consume news. Newspapers are still a huge industry and actually are found to be more reliable in their reporting, and I'll explain why later. So, I'm going to be opening up a case study today, and we're going to be looking at this Bollywood actor. Put your hand up if you've watched a Bollywood film before. Yes, sir. Put those hands up high. Okay. So, this is Sushant Singh Rajput. Now, he is also referred to in the media as SSR because it's easier to say. He was a young and rising Bollywood actor, and the issue with this case is that this is probably the case that got the most national coverage in like the last 10 years. Like, this has got an insane amount of media coverage because this case was initially about mental health, right? The cause of his death, according to some, was suicide, right? Whether he hung himself or overdosed, still kind of unclear, and I'll explain why later as well. But eventually what happened with the media was it turned into this kind of conspiracy theory, like oriented, they kind of muddled it up and created this mystery around what actually happened. And the public already has an interest in Bollywood, right? Any actors. And so of course they have an interest in this actor. But the reason why this was such a different case was because of the humble beginnings. He kind of represented the struggles of a common middle-class man, right? And he made it big in the industry, so people could kind of sympathize and relate to like the dream that he had achieved, right? And he wasn't a nepo baby, right? He didn't have any parents that were in the industry already. So this case is special because it kind of displays the worst aspects of Indian media's functioning, and it brought out the ugly sides of the justice system, politicians, Bollywood, and media. So this is some of the media news coverage. Now, from the moment the story broke in June 2020 until September, October, and months after, this was all media channels reported about 24/7. News is no longer new if it's 6 months old, okay? But the cycle kept updating. So this is something to think about. If there's something in the news that isn't really being updated and there's just speculation, you have to think about what the agenda or the motive is. Why is this being shown to you 4 months after the news is broke? So what started out as an open and shut suicide case, it kind of, the TV news, social media speculation, everyone had a say. Everyone and their mom had something to say about, oh, I know what's happened. I know what really happened. No, I know what really happened. So everyone had a say, and these conspiracies turned into a full-fledged media trial. So the media took justice into their own hands. Now this is a big issue because this case was under investigation. So the police authorities are trying to investigate what has happened to this person, and everyone else is trying to have a say, which did obstruct justice and it interfered with the police and the justice system. These are some of the conspiracy theories involved. Now in India, we have this thing called TRP. TRP is essentially television rating points, and this is probably the singular most toxic competition in the country. This is essentially a score of how well you are doing, how popular you were in high school, okay? These TV channels will do anything to boost their rating, because the higher rating you have, the more advertisers you have. And we all know why advertising is amazing. So, they would do anything, and if that meant, fake news, propaganda, media trials, sensationalizing something, creating controversy, they would go to any extent to boost their rating. Now, things primarily began to get out of hand because news was seen as a commodity, right? People are eating it up, they're buying, they're really interested. The more louder, the more outrageous your claims are, the more people that are going to be watching you. And outlets basically began to sell stories to polarize the society, right? And people were interested in this, people loved it. On top of the 24-hour news cycle, some primetime channels spent up to 70% of their airtime reporting on this. Why is this an issue? Because this came at a time where India was going through one of the worst economic times that we have ever seen. And we were also in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you can imagine that these kinds of reports were buried because people only cared about a Bollywood actor's death. Which, by the way, an actor's death is not an uncommon thing, especially in the media industry that's so big and toxic. So, as you can see also, there were plenty of YouTube channels, Twitter accounts, Facebook groups, WhatsApp messages, you name it. With the rise of citizen journalism and social media, anyone really was commenting and offering their perspective on what had happened, which makes it harder to find the source of their news. Like, where are you getting this information from? That's kind of the main, why should I trust what you're saying? Who makes you an expert on this? But everyone had something to say about this, and it kind of raises the question, if everyone is essentially reporting and being a journalist, then kind of no one really is being a journalist, So, like Amanda had mentioned, in this age of attention economy, our clicks, views, likes are all that matter, right? We become the commodity. Our online activity, our personal data, our emotions, our attention, that's what we're selling, right? So this really does sabotage journalistic ethics. Now, there were a lot of opinion channels and etc., but according to this independent study, when the news first broke, it was primarily about mental health, which is a very, very important and much needed conversation in India to this day, considering how high the suicide rates are. But as the story progressed, you can see, as three months of this reporting progressed, it became more about conspiracy and more theories about what this was really about. And this is kind of concerning, considering how much news is consumed in India. So it shows you what are they really being exposed to. In India, as you can see, news is almost as entertaining as a soap opera or reality TV or movies. So it's very entertaining, right? What are the consequences of this? Why am I sharing this with you? Because I'm trying to show you that this is kind of what happens when the Indian media becomes obsessed with an issue, right? You kind of poke at it from every angle. You overanalyze it as much as you can. Excessive media coverage obstructed justice in this case. And the High Court in India ordered media channels to issue an apology for their insensitive reporting and sensationalism of a death. This was not credible and speculative, and the media basically took justice into their own hands. So, they blew it out of proportion, they misled and polarized the public. And not in this case, but in many cases, when the media polarizes the public in India, it really can lead to very, very scary situations of violence. And it also kind of demonstrates how vulnerable the Indian population is and how bad the information ecosystem can be. So, what should you do? Well, I would say that the impact of too much information on the masses that aren't literate is very, very frightening to think about. As per the National Statistical Office, the average literacy rate in India was 77.7% in 2019 and 20, which just think about that for a moment. When you kind of just believe what you see, like that's a very psychological way of thinking about something. We use our system one thinking for those people who have taken psychology, right? This is like an affect heuristic. So we kind of emotionally rely on quick thinking. This is lazy thinking because we're relying on our emotions. But in a room full of people like us, right? For us, we might see something on the news and we're like, there's no way someone's going to believe that. No, there is. There is people that will believe it, okay? You might not, but there are people that can't discern. They cannot identify between what's real and what's not. So, there was an article from The Conversation, and in this era of information overload, right, we're like being attacked by so much information all the time. Just low quality, false, manipulative information. What can you do? You can ignore. You need to learn to critically ignore some information. But what else can be done in India? Well, self-regulation. I think we need to have more support for the regulatory bodies. Many analysts argue that the traditional media channels, a lot of these primetime channels and their media conglomerates, they have the resources and could, if they wanted to, they could separate fiction from fact. But will they be willing to take that gamble if it means sacrificing their rating or their viewership? We need more support for regulatory bodies in India, like the Press Council of India, the News Broadcasters Association. But above all, the most important thing that India needs, I believe, is a more educated population. Because you cannot trust an organization to change, but you can educate the population, and they can further sustain change for many generations to come. So I think a digitally literate population is a more effective solution. But my question was, who should you listen to? Well, it depends who's asking. I would say, if you ask me, who should I listen to? Which news channel should I watch? I can't really stand here and back a singular news organization and point at them and say, listen to them, you can trust them. Because that's just not really how the mediascape is nowadays. It's hard to justify proudly the ethics of anybody right now, especially with the internet and what comes out about people's pasts. So, what I would say is get in touch with your intuition and develop your own voice. Sometimes it is very hard to hear yourself think. You know, there's this expression, I can't hear myself think. It's very hard to hear yourself think when you're in a very noisy and disruptive environment. So you can learn to let information pass and take what you need. A lot of times we make quick judgments based on emotions because situations presented to us aren't like black and white. But I think we need to learn to see the gray. And especially, it is okay. I promise you, I guarantee you, it is okay to not have an opinion on something. Okay? We've become a very opinionated society, and while it's excellent to be well-informed, it is okay to have a neutral stance. So, detox, don't internalize everything you see, and consume everything with a healthy dose of skepticism and develop your own perspective. Shukriya.